This is Scenic Roots Talking Writing. Our guest is poet Helga Kidder. Helga grew up in Germany in a small town in the picturesque Black Forest. Her new collection of poetry traces the arc of her life from the time she moved to Chattanooga, just married with her husband when she was in her early 20s, up to today. It seems a natural place for us to start a conversation, as it is equally a natural place for you to begin your collection talking about coming to terms with a different language.
Yes.
First to speak it, that's enough. But then to write it, and then to write poetry in another language. And what I'm getting from your book, the arc of your book, is that it sort of traces the arc of your life. Is that accurate?
It is true, yes.
So it begins with Between Tongues,
Yeah.
and Between Tongues talks about when you were very new here.
Yes, what it meant to be kind of assaulted by this new language.
Assaulted?
And
Is that how it felt?
You had to learn to speak it if you wanted to communicate.
Yeah.
If you wanted to go forward.
And you'd never spoken English before you came?
I had heard it. You know, we played Elvis records. And I have heard snatches, and I liked it very much, but I had never formally studied it, no.
I've often wondered about that. So most popular music tends to be in English.
Yes.
So how is it then when English is not a language you understand? What do you get out of the music? Is it the melodies that you like and the rhythm?
It's the rhythm.
So the words don't necessarily matter that much?
Well, eventually you learn snatches of things. You know, you talk to your friends who might have taken some English. I don't know. We did not have it in school at that time. There were no other languages in school because it was after the war. And I lived in a small town. So, anyway.
And the country was recovering.
Exactly, yes. They were more concerned about making a livelihood at that point.
Teaching a second language was considered a higher calling, and that wasn't. You didn't need to have a second language to be able
to for ordinary people, you didn't need it.
Right.
That was their thinking, yes.
Except for you, Helga. So you were in your early 20s when you moved to Tennessee?
I was 21. I was a newlywed. My German husband was transferred to Chattanooga to work for a company, and so I went with him. It was a natural progression of things. And I kind of liked Chattanooga because it was a laid back southern town. And that fit me well because I was from a small town in Germany. I just never left. I love the surroundings, the area, the mountains, reminding me of the Black Forest.
When you read your poem, it's apparent that mostly you learned, or at least partly at least, you learned English from watching television, watching cartoons and so on?
Yes. I loved the cartoons because they would just have power words. And so, I mean, it's just stepping stones. And I remember watching Password with Alan Ludden, with my dictionary, and they would talk about a word and its definition, and so I would look it up, and that way I could remember it better because I'm a visual learner.
It strikes me that the people you were listening to spoke with that sort of what they call the Middle American accent. It's usually very articulated and very clear.
Yes.
The people you were around were speaking with a very different accent.
Absolutely. Holy smoke. My husband had to travel to South Georgia, and I could not understand what these people were trying to tell me. Of course, later I did, but that was very early. That was the first year I was here.
Yes, I can only imagine what a challenge that was. Not only did you have to decipher the language, but also, as would be true for anybody going to anywhere outside of a big city in another country, wouldn't it? People have regional accents.
Yeah. And it's interesting. My first sentence I spoke in English after 6 weeks. It was, "Would you like to have a Coke?"
You say it so nicely. Would you read your poem?
Yes. Between tongues. How many words are in a language? After 6 weeks of listening, layering words, stacking them into piles, in rooms wallpapered with my first language, I spoke my first full English sentence. The dichotomy similar to knit and purl, the wrong and right sides of meaning, or two trees with many branches, each wanting to grow in its own direction. Words flocking to me like birds, then flitting back to a branch. A new language, as if I had put on an overcoat, still dreaming in German, forever rooted in the language I was born into, assembling and moving words on the conveyor belt of knowledge. I corral sentences like horses, train them with daily exercises, watch Saturday morning cartoons or password dictionary in lap, ears always open to new sounds, new meanings, such as nip it in the bud, catty corner, a pone of corn in its sack. When will I be fluent? Years jumbled both languages inside me. Utterings reverted to childhood, leaving me to balance the tightrope of speech and understanding, suspended between two continents.
So nicely expressed. Both the notion of being suspended between two continents and putting on an overcoat, I think both speak to how complicated it is to be an immigrant.
It is. And
inside and outside are two different people. Huh?
Yeah. And I remember people asking me, do you dream in English or do you dream in German still? It just kind of jumbles inside you. It's interesting.
German is a really interesting language. I don't know very much German, but what it seems to me is that there are words in German that in English you'd have to have a whole sentence to express what it says in one word.
Yes, I experienced that when I was trying to translate German poetry into English, which I did when I was studying the language. And also, when I was trying to write poetry in German, I couldn't do it. I felt English brought it together much better, brought a thought much better together than I could in German. Of course, at 21, I had not read much, I had not seen much, so...
But when you first started to learn English, you were translating German poetry into English?
No, not at that time. It was much later when I got into poetry.
That's what I figured,
yes,
yeah, because that's a whole other undertaking.
Oh, yes.
So do you still feel that way? You'd rather write poetry in English than in German?
Yes. I have tried several times, and it just, I think I have been removed too much from the German language, because that language also has changed, just like the English language does. So while I can read and converse very well in German, to write poetry in the vernacular, I think I'm not able to do it well.
To write anything in the vernacular requires that you get inside the language.
Yes.
That's a deep understanding of a language. How long did it take you to reach that point where you've felt that not only that you understood it, but that you could express your feelings in that language?
Well, I think I only really have done that in the past 10 years. Until then, I've had the opportunity to work at the neurosurgical group, and I was able to learn more of the language of people who were well educated. And I think that helped me a lot as well.
They had a broader vocabulary.
Yes, absolutely.
Your poem After the War seemed uncomfortably of this moment. And I wonder if it strikes you that way with everything that's happening at the moment.
Yeah, I think when you're that young, we had a lot of immigrants from the East after the war, but people were, from what I remember, they were resistant to welcoming those people because they felt something was taken away from them. So I didn't think too much about it, but because I've had some of the experience, not personally so much, because I was very, very young during the war, but afterwards, people would talk about some things, even though my mother would never say very much what actually happened. For instance, I did not know about the Jewish people, the Holocaust, until I came over here, where it was openly talked about. And when I questioned my sister at the time, she said that it was not really made public until 1965, so that the students could learn about it.
So for 20 years it was suppressed.
Yeah. Yes.
Not surprisingly.
No.
It's a very difficult history to come to terms with.
Yeah, and in one of my later poems, When History Convicts, you can see how that impacted me and still does. I still feel a certain amount of guilt that my people did this. So.
Well, would you mind if we start with After the War?
Yes. After the war, the woman who fled the communists lived next door, knitted for money. Once she ran out of green wool, and I had to wear a cardigan with half of the sleeves, shades darker. But in the abandoned house beside the church lived a witch. Mother and neighbors gossiped. Behind the second floor window, glass grayed and smudged, we imagined her hexing passers-by. At night, we listened to the house confessing her spells. When my sister spilled oatmeal soup on my foot, she cried into Mother's apron as the nurse popped the blisters. That was after Dieter Gerz standing on top of a wagon, gunned my head with rocks, and for 6 weeks the bandage turned me into a mummy. On better days, we climbed the saints chiseled into the church walls, saw the cobbler's beard shake warnings as we tried to blow out the eternal light burning among the apostles, defending Jesus on the Mount of Olives. When all church bells rang and shook the dishes in the cupboard, we knew a soul had been saved from the witch. To celebrate, we sprinkled sugar on wet bread, crossed our foreheads with holy water. What could we believe when witches and saints lived next to each other?
The imagery in the Grimm's fairy tales comes to mind when you read that poem. It's we have such powerful images that come from Germany in our culture.
Yes.
Christmas is the one that's, I guess, most obvious.
Yeah.
You know, all the image. I didn't realize for a long time the images that are on the Christmas cards are mostly German images, because I'd look at it and I'd say, well, it doesn't look like that at Christmas here, you know.
Yeah.
But we had German royals, and I think that they were the ones that first started the whole idea of sending cards and having the tree and all that. But for you, it's a little confusing. It's almost as if you've got those Grimm's fairy tales in your head when you're looking at this poor woman who's being identified as a witch in your village.
Yeah, that was... We were scared. We were scared. We didn't walk close to that house because we just knew that witch. You know, we'd look up, but the window was smeared, and it was a time when you were impressed with things like that. You know, in the church, the saints, and then the witch. And after the war, all these things that were askew, I think.
What do you think was her story? She was just an older lady who lived by herself?
I'm not even sure anyone lived there. I don't know how the story came about, but like I said, I think mother and neighbors gossip about it maybe, or maybe an older kid said, you know, a witch lives there, you better get out of my way, or something like that.
And when you're young like that, you take it at face value.
Yes.
It must be true.
Yes.
People say it. So how did you decide how to divide the book the way you have into 4 sections?
It really was hard because I wanted to be true to the title, that it was a learning experience. So I felt that each section should contain something that had to do personally with my personal life. And I think I did that.
Oh, I think you did too.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, just from the way it's the whole collection starts with you wrestling with the language, it seems like a natural place, as I said before, to start.
I had a hard time really sectioning it all off, but I did want to have it in sections.
I guess you had help from an editor?
No.
You didn't? You did it by yourself?
Oh, yes. Yes.
One of the poems in the second section is called Verklempt. And we were talking about that. It's a Jewish word, apparently, Yiddish.
It's Yiddish, yes. However, I easily can identify with it. Verklempt means choked up, uptight. And it just spoke to me. So I decided to write on it. Shall I read it?
Yes, I think it's as much the reason that it caught my eye initially is because it speaks to your affection for language and your understanding of the richness of language.
Yeah, I try to understand it, yes. And but I'm still in the learning process on that one too. Verklempt. Some mornings clouds fill with gloom. Verklempt, choked up, uptight, the sky as if caught in a vice. I hear verklempt, feel pierced by a hook like an old coat. My mind forced, squeezed into a metal box, contrary to my usual free fall flying over a sea of knowledge. I am a lover of butterflies and hummingbirds, the delicate process of petals forming into a bloom. In Yiddish, verklempt means a man depressed and grieving at the loss of his brother. I, too, have known that feeling. Perhaps verklempt stems from Klammer in German, verb klemmen, a wooden pin mother used to hang linens on the line. Some mornings words flap in the wind. Some mornings they open the squeaky door to a spacious barn. They climb to the loft, fall into piles of hay that scratch and needle the day.
I think they do for somebody with your imagination, Helga. I'm not sure that's necessarily true for all of us, but I guess it is. It's almost a commonplace to say that we're largely defined by how we express ourselves.
Yes, yeah.
The language you use, and that's, I think, why English is such a magpie language. It's stolen words from all over the world, hasn't it? All these, which is, I guess, part of the reason, as you were alluding before.
Yes.
That especially vernacular expressions are sometimes really hard to understand for somebody who's not a native speaker.
Oh,
even
right.
for people who are native speakers,
yes.
come to that.
Yes.
I can't think of one off the top of my head, but...
No, I'm trying to think of one that they used during the war, I think, and the Japanese were trying to interpret what it means, and they couldn't, but I can't think of the word right now. I'm sorry. Dang. My husband would know.
but we are defined by language.
Yes.
And for someone like yourself, you spent the first 20-odd years of your life expressing yourself and thinking of yourself in one language, and then you embraced a second language. Did that change the way you were thinking?
Yes, I'm afraid I became American.
What does that mean to you?
Which means, to me, that when I grew up, everything was very structured, and we were to obey no matter what. Of course, then when I came over here, I was older, but I experienced a freedom that I didn't think I could ever have in Germany. There are so many rules in Germany about what you can do and what you can't do. And over here, too, we need to obey the law. But I think you just have a freedom to say no to something. And you don't necessarily have to worry about your neighbors or what other people think. Because I grew up in a small town, everyone was in everybody's business. And so over here that, I felt like a bird, flying wherever I wanted to go.
I can relate. I felt the same way.
Also, I had so much encouragement over here, which I did not get in Germany. You were labeled quickly as you grow up.
So true, isn't it? I had the same experience.
Yes. So, anyway, I just love it over here. Yes.
It strikes me that the best way for us to organize our conversation is for the first part will be the first two sections of your book, and the second part will be the third and fourth part.
Okay.
So could we close with When History Convicts?
Absolutely. And that is one of my newer poems that kind of slipped in at the end of putting this book together. And the more I was thinking about what was happening in this country, it made me think about how I feel. And we have to live with a history that is ours. Anyway, when history convicts, let it sink in, the constant reminder of the sins of history, not mine. Slip off that garment of cellophane clinging to the mind, universal. I try to laugh, pry this damn thing off me that keeps burning my inside. I wasn't there. It happened without me. Yet everywhere I turn, even in church, someone finds it, the history, and uses it as an example. Yes, the history of that country is buried inside me with my father. It clings to my blood, the sins of the fathers of that time. How they shaped the years afterwards. All the sharp-edged slivers left, the preacher throws at me. I've prayed that history will be forgiven. I've prayed.
Helga Kidder's just published collection of poetry is titled Learning Curve. The second half of my conversation with poet Helga Kidder will be on next week's Talking Writing on Scenic Roots, here on listener-supported public radio in Chattanooga.